Hey everybody, in this video I'm going to talk about the difference between UI, user interface, versus UX, user experience. UI is just the visual appearance of an app or a site. The colors that you choose, the aesthetics of it, how good it looks, how appealing it is. UX is short for user experience, and it's about how the user interface functions and how easy it is to use, hence experience, user experience. So we look at things like buttons, what happens when you click on a button, or how the menus are positioned and how the menus will react to users when the user, for instance, mouses over a particular menu item. Does it pop open? Does it pop down? Does it pop up? Does it hold when you hold your mouse over it? Etc., etc., etc. Now, user experience is by far more important than user interface. So UX is much more important than UI because UI, user interface design, again, it's just about the aesthetics, the look of it. And for many, many, many apps out there, UI is really not very important at all. So think of sites like Google. It isn't exactly the most exciting user interface. It's very plain Jane. Look at things like Reddit. Again, very, very plain. It's almost a throwback to the 1990s web in terms of its user interface. Look at Craigslist, another hugely successful site. Again, these are sites that prove that the UI, the user interface, in terms of its aesthetics and visual appeal, are not terribly important because all these hugely successful sites are not visually compelling. Now, it can only help if you have something that looks kind of good, but then again, you look at a site like Digg, which was something that was really big at one point, and they just lost it. They went very corporate looking in their layout, and who cares about Digg? Everybody is on Reddit now. So even though Digg has a much more visually appealing, a much better UI in terms of its aesthetics, much more polished looking than Reddit, Reddit is still by far much, much more popular, much more successful. Now, is Reddit more popular because it has better UX, user experience? That's a debate. It could be the content and the combination of UX, hard to say. So what's UX? Again, to reiterate, UX is the user experience. It has to do about where you place things on the screen, not necessarily how they look, but where and how they react when users interact with your user interface components. So where you put your menus, where you put your buttons, where you put your links, how the buttons react when people click on them, how links react when people click on them. And this applies to both web apps and mobile apps as well. And let me just say, UX is far more important in terms of an app's success than UI. No question. I just gave you a few examples. Reddit, Google, Craigslist, hugely successful. Hardly any UI really to speak of. It's just very plain. But the UX and thus the usability of the site is extremely, extremely high level. It's very, very capable. So there you go. That is the difference. When I look at any apps myself, I pay very, very, very close attention to UX personally. UI, I kind of art direct UI, and I sort of give a basic idea of what I'm looking for. But when it comes to UX, I'm right in there big time because I really feel, well, actually, I know how important it is. In 2016 and 17 and going forward, the challenge for developers is UX. The challenge is UX. I was talking to a friend of mine who works for a huge corporation, and they see that too. Every developer can now develop an app that does X, Y, or Z. The technical challenges are not very many when it comes to developing apps because software development environments, the languages, the frameworks that we see out there are so sophisticated now and refined that you can get a lot done with very little code and there's no technical hurdles. Back in the 90s, there was a lot of technical hurdles. Not anymore. So the differentiator between a successful app and a non-successful app comes down to UX. It comes down to functionality, what it actually does and how easily it does it. So UX is a big part of that, of course. So there you go. To conclude, you should know that in the software space, there is the rise now of UX experts. That's what they do. Their job is to make apps and sites very, very, very usable. It's a science. It's also an art. And that's a profession that you might want to get into if you're interested in working for large corporations, because they're looking for experienced UX people who can make apps easy to use. Because again, that's what separates the successful apps. Well, it's one of the main elements that separates the successful apps from the not so successful apps. I hope this vlog was useful to you. Ciao.